Once, Yining thought that being able to walk from the campus to the wedding dress with Shen Yanzhi was the happiest thing in her life. It was not until Shen Yanzhi's infidelity that she understood that there was no such thing as a deep and untimely relationship, a long life together, and more of it was just a result of the ups and downs of life, not meeting each other. After divorce, she was unwilling to give up her true feelings. But Shen Si forcefully broke into her world, leaving her with no opportunity to escape. She retreated step by step and didn't want to have any relationship with the Shen family anymore. He kept pressing her step by step, only wanting to surround her in his arms. "Uncle, we're not suitable." The man gently pinched her chin and forced her to look up at him. "You divorced Shen Yanzhi, what kind of uncle am I? And you haven't even tried, how do you know it's not suitable?" Yining. "I have tried." Shen Si. "Then try again until it fits." Yining. Chapter 1. Betrayal. You are listening at novel.Audio. In the third month of pregnancy preparation, Yining saw a message on her husband Shen Yanzhi's WeChat from a person with a note of Qin's secretary. "My newly bought pajamas seem a bit tight. Can you help me check if they are small or not?" Below the text is a selfie of a woman wearing a deep red camisole dress with a crispy chest half exposed, tempting to the extreme. She unconsciously tightened her hand while holding the phone, flipped it over, and found that the two had been in normal work communication before. She couldn't help but frown. "Did you send the wrong message?" Or one hand clasped her waist from behind, interrupting her contemplation. As Shen Yanzhi's hot body pressed against her, she lightly bit Yining's earlobe. "Wife, I have already washed it. Do you want to be on the sofa or in bed?" Before Yining could react, he picked her up horizontally and placed her on the sofa, his tall figure pressing down. "Since you're not talking, let me choose for you, just on the sofa." His voice was a bit hoarse, staring at Yining's eyes as if there was a cluster of fire, and her face turned red when she rubbed against it. She was already beautiful, with slightly red cheeks that looked like ripe peaches under the light, tempting to pick. Shen Yanzhi's eyes darkened a bit, and as she lowered her head to cover her lips, she suddenly turned her head to one side. Sensing her resistance, Shen Yanzhi lowered his head and looked at her, his eyes full of confusion. "Wife, what's wrong?" The man who usually acts vigorously in the company is now looking at her with grievances, which makes Yining's heart suddenly soften. However, she did not forget the extremely revealing selfie she took just now. Extend one hand to his chest, and hand the phone screen to his eyes with the other hand. "Can you explain first what's going on?" Shen Yanzhi glanced at it, then furrowed his brows and took his phone to make a call. "Quickly, it will be connected over there." "Mr. Shen, what can I do for you?" Shen Yan's face was gloomy, and his voice was extremely cold. "How come I don't know when Secretary Qin switched to recruiting clients?" After a few seconds of silence across from him, Qin Zi's slightly panicked voice finally came over. "Mr. Shen, I'm sorry, those two messages were sent to my boyfriend. Maybe I accidentally clicked the wrong one at the time. Next time, pack your things and get lost." The moment he hung up the phone and looked at Yining, his originally cold expression changed back to gentleness, even with a hint of grievance. "Wife, she just made a mistake. If you're still angry, I'll fire her tomorrow. It's already late, don't waste time on someone who's not worth it. We haven't seen each other for a week, so you must compensate me well tonight." As he spoke, he clasped her waist and kissed her. However, although the matter was explained clearly, Yining's mood was also disrupted, and she had no intention of doing that. She pushed Shen Yanzhi away and said, "I'm a bit tired tonight. Let's continue tomorrow night." Shen Yan's eyes flashed with disappointment, but he didn't force her either. "Okay, then you go to bed first. I'm not tired right now. I'll go to the study to take care of my work for a while." In the middle of the night, it started pouring rain outside the window. Yining was awakened by the sound of rain and reached out to touch her side, feeling icy cold. She turned her head to look at the time, at 3:16 a.m. Is Shen Yanzhi still handling work? I got up and put on a nightgown to go to the study. When I pushed open the door, I found it pitch black inside, and Shen Yanzhi was not inside. She unconsciously tightened her fingers as she pinched the handle, and her heart gradually sank. Ding dong. The phone suddenly rang, appearing more prominent in the quiet night. Upon seeing the friend application from the unfamiliar avatar, Yining had an intuition that after receiving the friend request from the other party, she and Shen Yanzhi could never go back to their past. At this moment, a thunderous sound suddenly came from outside the window, which frightened Yining's hand and accidentally triggered a refusal. Quickly, several friend requests were sent from across the street. Still awake? Is it because your husband isn't by your side? I was afraid of lightning and power outage, so he came over to accompany me. Don't you want to know where your husband is now? As Yining watched the other party keep sending applications and boastful words, her hand holding her phone couldn't help but tremble. It was a long time before she agreed. Just as a friend requested, the other party directly sent an address and a string of numbers. Yining bit her lower lip and took the car key and drove over directly. It was already around 4 a.m. when she arrived at the villa entrance. She entered the number sent by the other party and the door opened. The lights in the living room were on, and men's suits and women's underwear scattered all the way from the entrance to the bedroom door, indicating how anxious the two were at that time. Seeing the torn red nightgown at the bedroom door, Yining felt a sense of absurdity as expected. The entrance to the bedroom was only a few meters away, but Yining felt as if she had exhausted all her strength, so much so that when she stood at the door of the bedroom, she felt a sense of weightlessness. She trembled as she reached out her hand and slowly pushed open the open door. The messy big bed, naked men and women hugging each other, and the rapid breathing intertwined into a lewd scene, stinging Yining's eyes. The two of them forgot their feelings and didn't even notice her standing at the door. Yining's hand supporting the door frame turned blue and white, and her fair palm was marked with red marks due to force. She has been with Shen Yanzhi for 8 years, from campus to wedding dress, and is a couple envied by friends around her. Before today, she never thought that the word betrayal would appear between them. But now, reality has dealt her a hard blow. Originally, no matter how perfect or serious the wedding oath is, it cannot resist the fickleness of people's hearts. She was so nauseous that she couldn't keep looking anymore. She turned around and stumbled towards the door, starting the car and leaving. Passing by a bar on the street, Yining parked and walked in. When Shi Wei arrived, she had already drunk 2 bottles of whiskey and her eyes were a bit confused. "Vivi, you're here." Seeing Yining embracing each other, with 4 or 5 male models sitting next to her, Shi Wei frowned. "You all go out first. Don't worry, they're doing well here. Everyone go out." After driving away the male model, Shi Wei sat down next to Yining and said, "What's going on? Did Shen Yanzhi really cheat?" Shi Wei and Yining are college roommates and witnesses who watched them go from campus to their wedding dress. Over the years, she has seen Shen Yanzhi's kindness towards Yining, so when she heard Yining say that Shen Yanzhi was cheating, her first reaction was whether there was any misunderstanding inside. Upon hearing Shen Yanzhi's name, Yining's eyes dimmed, and the heart-wrenching pain swept through her once again. "I don't want to hear that name now." Chapter 2 Is Nothing. You are listening at novelfull.audio. She picked up her glass and drank it all in one gulp. For so many years, she never expected Shen Yanzhi to betray herself. At the moment he slept with another woman, it's not an exaggeration to say that 10,000 arrows pierced through his heart. "I just feel that he loves you so much and doesn't seem to be cheating. Is there a misunderstanding here?" Yining sneered, "I saw it with my own eyes." "Is it still a misunderstanding?" In the private room, there was an instant silence. Seeing Yining drinking one cup at a time as if she didn't want to die, Shi Wei couldn't help but snatch the glass from her hand. Even if he really cheated, you shouldn't punish yourself by getting drunk. What are you planning to do next? Of course it's divorce, and now whenever I think of the scene where he slept with that woman, I feel nauseous. Looking at her bright red eyes and the unwillingness in them, Shi Wei was filled with heartache. Don't think about it for now. You need to rest well now. After your mood calms down, what do you want to do? I'll take you back. Yining shook her head and said, no. I don't want to go back. As soon as she returned to that home, she would definitely keep thinking about the scene of Shen Yanzhi's infidelity. As long as she recalls it once, she will be disgusted again. Seeing her resistance on her face, Shi Wei didn't insist either. Then I'll book a hotel for you. After booking the hotel, Shi Wei escorted Yining to the hotel entrance and said with some unease, are you sure you don't want me to take you up? Yining shook her head and said, no need, you should go back and rest quickly. She waved her room card at Shi Wei and got off the car to walk towards the hotel. Seeing that her pace was relatively steady, Shi Wei finally breathed a sigh of relief and watched as she walked into the hotel before driving away. However, what she didn't know was that when Yining got drunk, it was no different from usual. At first glance, she looked very clear, but in fact, her mind was already a mess. She walked into the elevator holding the room card, swiped the card, and the elevator closed and began to rise. Quickly, with a ding, the elevator door opened. As soon as she stepped out of the elevator and stepped on the carpet, Yining's legs softened and she almost fell. She held on to the nearby wall and barely stood firm. She rubbed her sore temples and walked inside, checking the room number. However, at this moment, the alcohol was strong, and when she looked at things, her eyes were full of double shadows. When she saw 8919, she directly leaned the room card against the door. She didn't hear the beep sound of the room door opening. She frowned and reached out to push the door when it suddenly opened. Yining was stunned for a moment, but before she could react, a big hand pulled her into the darkness. Bang! As the room door was closed, the silk outside was also cut off. She was pressed against the door, and the aggressive aura from the man sprayed in her ear, causing her to involuntarily tremble. A refreshing scent of pine struck, and Yining felt somewhat familiar with it. However, before she could react, a warm touch came from her lips. Realizing what had happened, Yining quickly struggled. However, the man's strength was great, and with her drinking a lot tonight, her hand against the man's chest was soft and powerless, unlike resistance, but rather like wanting to refuse and welcome. The man's hot hands lingered on her, and wherever he touched her, it felt as if he had been touched by fire, sending waves of warmth. Yining's body also became softer and softer. She wanted to push away the man pressing against her, but the other person easily noticed her movements and lifted her hands to press her head. Let go. Let go. The man let go of her lips and chuckled softly, if you want to refuse, there's no need to greet. His finger landed on Yining's collar, with a hint of coolness that made her shiver uncontrollably. The man's body temperature seemed to melt her, and her legs gradually became soft. In the darkness, the tactile senses are magnified. Yining could feel that the other person's fingers were constantly unbuttoning her clothes, leaving her mouth dry and tongue dry. The only remaining bit of reason was telling her that if this continued, it would definitely go wrong. Let go of me. She tried her best to reject the other party, but was directly picked up and thrown into bed by the other party. The bed was very soft, and Yining didn't feel any pain, but this fall made her head even more dizzy. She struggled to remember when a tall figure pressed down. Soon, her clothes were stripped off, and the two of them were almost naked. The man pressed tightly against her, ready to go. The aggressive aura on the other person made her shudder uncontrollably. She reached out and pressed her hand against their chest, biting her lower lip hard, forcing herself to wake up and calm down. "Sir, I may have walked into the wrong room. Please let go of me." Due to being too nervous, her voice trembled slightly. "Tisk." The man's voice was somewhat impatient and his tone was also cold. "Are you addicted to playing, right?" Shen Fang was about to get up and ask the other party to roll when the lights in the room suddenly lit up. It turned out that when Yining was struggling just now, she accidentally slapped the back of her hand on the light switch. The sudden light made Shen Si unconsciously squint his eyes. When he saw the woman lying under him in shock, his face suddenly changed. At this moment, Yining also saw Shen Si clearly. Her face turned pale for fear, and her mind was still a bit confused. Now, she was so scared that she woke up drunk. She didn't expect that the person who almost violated her was actually Shen Yanzhi's uncle Shen Si. Uncle. Yining has always been a bit afraid of Shen Si. He is the youngest son of the Shen family. Mr. Shen and Mrs. Shen are both spoiled and have a rebellious and cold personality. Not to mention the Shen family, outsiders dare not provoke him. When she first married Shen Yanzhi and went to visit the elders of the Shen family, Shen Yanzhi reminded her not to have too much contact with Shen Fang. "Shut up." Shen Si's face was extremely ugly, and his gaze at Yining was as cold as snow, as if considering the possibility of killing someone to silence him. However, when her gaze touched the snow-white on her chest, it suddenly darkened for a moment. He didn't look away and got up from bed, saying coldly, "Get out of here with your clothes on." At the moment he got up, Yining's gaze saw the wrong place to look. She was stunned for a moment, then involuntarily averted her gaze, but her ears turned red. Looking at her flushed face, Shen Si's expression immediately became even more ugly. "Don't you get out of here yet." Yining didn't care about embarrassment and quickly picked up her clothes and casually put them on, leaving without looking back. It wasn't until she walked out of the room that she dared to look back at the room number. In the moment she saw it clearly, she finally understood why Shen Si had said she wanted to refuse and even welcomed her. That's not what 8919 is, it's clearly 8916. She walked into the wrong room and almost had sex with her husband's uncle. Thinking of this, Yining felt even more pain in her head after a hangover. "If I had known earlier that Sure Wei had brought me up, no matter what, I wouldn't have gone wrong. But it's too late to regret now." In the room, after Yining left, Shen Si dialed a phone with a gloomy expression on his face. "Delete all surveillance footage of Emperor Jing tonight." After giving orders, Shen Si saw the messy sheets and blankets, lit a cigarette, and his restlessness grew stronger in his eyes. "I almost fell in love with my nephew's wife. What the hell is it?" Chapter 3. Want a child? You are listening at novelfull.audio. On the way back, Yining hesitated for a long time before sending a message to Shen Fang, who had not been contacted for 3 years. "Uncle. Can we just pretend that tonight's incident never happened? I really drank too much and walked into the wrong room." After waiting for a long time, Shen Si didn't answer. Yining frowned and sent another message. However, as soon as the message was sent out, a red exclamation mark appeared in front of it. "The other party has initiated friend verification, but you are still not their friend." Yining pursed her lips and deleted her, probably not wanting to bring up this matter again, right? Thinking of this, Yining finally breathed a sigh of relief in her heart. Returning home, it was already past 6 in the morning. As soon as I opened the door, I saw Shen Yanzhi sitting on the sofa. Upon hearing the sound of the door opening, he suddenly turned his head and looked at Yining's eyes, which were crimson red, indicating that he had not slept all night. "Wife, where did you go last night? I called you more than 10 times, why didn't you answer?" Shen Yanzhi stood up and walked quickly towards her, reaching out to grab her hand, but was avoided by Yining. He hesitated for a moment and was about to speak when Yining spoke coldly, "If you can stay up all night, then I can't." Yining has a very good personality. They have been together for 8 years and have hardly ever blushed. This is the first time she has spoken to him in such a cold and indifferent tone. Sensing that her emotions were not right and her eyes were slightly swollen, Shen Yanzhi's eyes flickered and his hand, which was hanging on his side, slowly tightened. You know, right? His voice was calm, without any ups and downs or panic, as if he had already guessed such a day. Looking at his innocent appearance, Yining's suppressed emotions finally erupted. She suddenly lifted her bag and threw it at him, her eyes turning red like a madman. The moments of kindness he had towards himself and their happiness in the past were torn apart when she saw him sleeping with another woman last night, and could no longer be pieced together. Shen Yanzhi, how could you do such a disgusting thing? If you don't love me anymore, you can divorce me. Why did you treat me like this? She thought there would never be a third party between them, but reality slapped her hard. Fan her awake from the illusions he had woven, and turned her still surging love for him into a joke. Seeing her bright red eyes, Shen Yanzhi's heart froze and he grabbed her hand, taking her into his arms. Yining, I'm sorry. Yining pushed him away, wanting to laugh, but tears kept slipping down her face. Don't touch me with your dirty hands. Is it difficult to justify it? After marrying you, I haven't never met an excellent man, nor have I never been treated well by a man, but I have never crossed boundaries. I can do it, why can't you? Seeing the disappointment and anger in her eyes, Shen Yanzhi clenched his fist. Yining, all I love is you. It was just an accident with her. His explanation appeared so pale and powerless that Yining found it both ridiculous and disgusting upon hearing it. As you say, I can also go find a man to have sex with and tell you it was an accident. Although my body had an affair, I only love you in my heart, right? A hint of coldness flashed in Shen Yan's eyes, and he said word by word, if you dare, I'll kill you and that man on the bed together. Facing his cold and indifferent gaze, Yining felt her heart cold. He also knew that betrayal was unforgivable, but he still betrayed her. She took a deep breath and slowly said, do you remember what I said to you when you proposed to me? She said that if one day he betrayed her, she would not forgive him, only leave him. Shen Yanzhi's face changed and he said, I can't let you go. Yining wiped away the tears from the corner of her eyes, looked at him with a mocking expression, mixed with a hint of hatred, and said, whether you agree or not, I have already made up my mind. I want to divorce you, and you don't deserve my forgiveness. After speaking, no matter what his reaction was, Yining jumped over him and went upstairs directly. Shen Yanzhi stared fixedly at her back, his eyes filled with gloom. Returning to the bedroom, Yining went straight to the bathroom to take a shower, and the alcohol smell all over her body was unbearable. When wiping the shower gel, I looked down and saw the red marks on my chest, and my movements unconsciously paused. The scene of those slender hands wandering around me unconsciously came to mind. I couldn't help but frown and wipe with a towel a few times until everything turned red before giving up. It seems like this is the way to erase the traces left by that person on oneself. After taking a shower, Yining walked out of the bathroom and saw Shen Yanzhi sitting on the bed with his head down, not knowing what he was thinking. Yining frowned and decided not to see him. Anyway, they will get divorced soon. Upon hearing footsteps, Shen Yanzhi lifted his head and saw the scene of Yining walking out surrounded by a towel. Half-wet hair draped behind her, still dripping water. Her freshly bathed cheeks turned crimson, like freshly bloomed roses that were tempting to pick, emitting a tempting aroma. The bath towel could cover her buttocks, revealing her slender and fair legs below, making her fantasize. Shen Yanzhi's breathing suddenly became heavy, and his gaze seemed to be glued to Yining's body, unable to move any further. Yining didn't notice his change and walked up to the wardrobe, about to take her pajamas. Suddenly, she hugged her with both hands from behind. Lemon. He has a hoarse voice with an undisguised desire. Just now downstairs, after Yining left, Shen Yanzhi was thinking about how to make her change her mind. The only way that came to his mind in the end to keep Yining by his side was to have a child with her. He also came upstairs to talk to her about this matter. He had planned to take it step by step, but when he saw Yining just taking a shower, he suddenly couldn't control it. If it were in the past, this kind of Shen Yanzhi would make her emotional, but now Yining only feels nauseous. She turned around and pushed him away, her eyes filled with disgust. "Don't touch me, I find it dirty." Shen Yanzhi's eyes flashed with a hint of injury. He held her hand and said seriously, "Didn't you always want to have a child? Let's have it now, okay?" Looking at him with a natural expression, Yining shook him off. "That was before, I might have children in the future, but it can't be yours." This angered Shen Yanzhi. He grabbed her hand and threw her onto the bed, pressing her down. "Say it again." His eyes were filled with towering anger, but Yining paid no attention at all. "It's the same no matter how many times I say it. Now that I see you, I feel nauseous. If I had to give birth to you, I would rather die." As soon as he finished speaking, he was fiercely kissed by Shen Yanzhi. Chapter 4. Everything I Give. You are listening at life.Audio. Yining hesitated for a moment, then struggled desperately. Whenever she thinks of him kissing another woman last night, she feels nauseous and angry. Let go. For Shen Yanzhi, her struggle was like a weak horse shaking a tree. The hand clasped around her waist not only did not relax at all, but also tightened a lot. Due to her struggle, the towel on her body quickly loosened, and from Shen Yanzhi's perspective, the scenery on her chest was fully visible. His eyes dimmed, and he felt all the blood rushing towards him. Their bodies were still tightly pressed together, and Yining quickly noticed the changes in Shen Yanzhi's body. She was angry, biting him hard, and the strong smell of blood immediately spread in their mouths. However, not only did he not let go of her, his other hand even leaned in from under the bathrobe. She just took a shower and didn't wear anything underneath. Yining's body stiffened suddenly and then struggled even more fiercely. "Shen Yanzhi, get out of here." Shen Yan's fingers kept teasing her sensitive points as if she hadn't heard her. "Yining, you also need me, don't you?" Yining struggled continuously, but it had no effect, and her heart became increasingly desperate. Finally, in the moment he pressed against her, she closed her eyes in despair. "Shen Yanzhi, don't make me hate you." Shen Yanzhi's movement suddenly froze, and as he lowered his head to look at Yining, his pupils involuntarily contracted. He had never seen such a seasoned lemon before, full of despair and pain, like an exquisite ceramic doll that could shatter at any moment. He wanted her, going crazy. But at the same time, there was a voice in his heart telling him that if he really wanted her, their relationship would be completely over. Shen Yanzhi stared at her intently, his hand gripping her waist tightly tightened, his eyes struggling. After more than 10 seconds, he suddenly let go of her and got up and walked away quickly. Bang! The bedroom door was slammed hard, and the loud closing sound made Yining unconsciously tremble. Her hand holding the blanket also unconsciously tightened. In the next few days, Shen Yanzhi did not return. Yining called him several times to ask him to come back and talk about the divorce, but he didn't respond at all. It was soon the weekend when Yining was in the living room submitting her resume and preparing to find a job when the villa door suddenly rang and Shen Yanzhi walked in from the door. A few days without seeing him, he seems to have become quite haggard. With their eyes facing each other, both of them remained somewhat silent. Yining was the first to break the calm. She closed the computer, stood up, and looked at him calmly. "Since you're back, let's talk about divorce." Shen Yanzhi frowned and said, "I told you, I won't divorce. I came back today to remind you that you're going to the old house for dinner tonight. The Shen family has a family banquet once a month, and since their marriage to Shen Yanzhi, the two of them have visited their old house once a month. The Shen family is not very easy to get along with, and they don't really look up to her. Every time Yining goes by, she is constantly being harassed, both openly and secretly. Before, she could still comfort herself as long as Shen Yanzhi loved her, and no one else needed to care. But when she saw that behind the scenes that day, she could no longer deceive herself. "I don't want to go, you can go by yourself." Shen Yanzhi's expression was somewhat helpless, and there was also a hint of impatience in his eyes. "Yining, when exactly are you going to cause trouble?" He has been turning a blind eye to her phone calls and messages for the past few days, just trying to calm her down. Unexpectedly, it's still the same now as before. "I didn't make any fuss, I just wanted to divorce you." Upon hearing the words divorce, Shen Yanzhi's last bit of patience was exhausted, and looking at Yining's gaze seemed to be looking at something strange. "Divorce? Since we got married, you haven't been working anymore. What do you use to make a living after divorce? Which company would want you? And your father's exorbitant hospitalization expenses, can you afford them? Yining, you are no longer a girl of 17 or 18 years old. You are already 20.8 now. Can you be a little more mature? I am President Shen, and I always encounter various temptations outside. Sometimes it's normal that I can't resist them, but those women will definitely not affect your position as Mrs. Shen. What else do you want? Why doesn't she understand? He still loves her, but she won't be the only woman in his life." Looking at Shen Yanzhi's aggressive appearance, Yining couldn't connect him with the shy boy who blushed and promised to never make her sad in college. Perhaps this is what he was originally like, selfish, proud, and aloof. If your so-called maturity is to tolerate you messing around outside, I'm sorry, I can't become mature. You can find another woman. This is the divorce agreement I drafted with a lawyer, you can sign it when you're free. Looking at the document she handed over, Shen Yanzhi took it over with a mocking expression and flipped through it. Seeing the division of property, he couldn't help but sneer. "I can't tell, you have a big appetite and actually want to share half of my property. Do you think it's possible? I deserve it, why not?" Shen Yanzhi chuckled lightly and said calmly, "Take a look at this family. What did you spend money on to buy? And in the years since we got married, I have been paying for your father's medical expenses. If we really count it up, you should have given me the money. Should I have a lawyer settle it?" Looking at his harsh appearance, Yining couldn't believe that she had fallen in love with such a person before. It can only be said that he disguised himself too well before, to the extent that she thought he was a peerless good man before discovering his infidelity. "Shen Yanzhi, don't forget that if I hadn't given you that patent back then, you wouldn't have been able to secure the position of CEO of the Shen family. Moreover, after getting married, you said you wanted me to return to my family. If I continued to pursue research, I would definitely have earned more than what you have given me in recent years." Shen Yanzhi didn't care at all and said with a faint expression, "Who would believe the patent matter if you say it now? I don't want to calculate money with you either, but if you insist on divorce, I have to figure it out with you. Yining, as long as you don't mention divorce anymore, you can still use my money freely." Shen Yanzhi, you are so shameless. Since he refused to divorce, she had to find a lawyer to file a lawsuit. She turned around to leave, but was stopped by Shen Yanzhi. "Go change your clothes and join me at a family banquet." "I said I won't go, just tell them I'm not feeling well." As soon as she finished speaking, Shen Yanzhi grabbed her wrist and said in a deep voice, "Yining, I don't have much patience anymore. Don't force me to cut off your father's medical expenses. How dare you?" Shen Yanzhi directly took out his phone and dialed the secretary's phone number. "Hello, my father.in.law's medical expenses next month." I didn't expect him to actually do this. Yining was so angry that her eyes turned red. She suddenly grabbed his phone and hung up the call. "Shen Yanzhi, don't go too far. Excessive." Shen Yanzhi looked at her with disdain in his eyes, pulling her in front of him and speaking condescendingly, "Yining, everything you have now is given to you by me. Don't you think you're the one who's excessive? Go change your clothes, otherwise I have 100 ways to make you compromise. Chapter 5. When to have children. You are listening at life.Audio. Seeing the coldness in his eyes, Yining only felt that she had been blind before. How could she fall in love with such a person? Her eyes were sour, but she didn't want to show any fragility in front of him. Shaking his hand hard, Yining took a deep breath and turned to walk upstairs. At this moment, she only has one idea in her heart. She must find a job as soon as possible so that she can move out and find a way to divorce Shen Yanzhi. I casually found a set of clothes to change into, fixed my hair with a hairpin, and then went downstairs. She is a casual person who doesn't pay much attention to dressing and grooming. In the past, in order to leave a good impression in the hearts of the Shen family, they would dress up well when attending Shen family banquets. Now, she is too lazy to cater to them anymore. Upon hearing the footsteps, Shen Yan instinctively looked up. Yining is dressed in an improved white cheongsam with a waist as thin as a willow. It seems that he can hold it with one hand. His long black hair is fixed with a hotan jade hairpin, revealing a thin white neck, which is beautiful. Her gentle and calm demeanor was no different from when they first met. However, she looked at her gaze with extreme coldness, and there was no longer any warmth from the beginning. Let's go. On the way to the Shen family, the two remained silent all the way. Arriving at the entrance of Shen's house, the two of them were about to get off when a black Land Rover Range Rover roared towards them, then slammed on the brakes and stopped directly in front of Shen Yanzhi's car. Recognizing Shen Si's car, Shen Yan's face looked a bit ugly. For this uncle, Shen Yanzhi is both afraid and disliked, and doesn't want to have any contact with him. After all, Shen Si acted just like his name, acting recklessly, which Shen Yanzhi couldn't bear. Back then, Mr. Shen was planning to let him take over the Shen family, but he refused directly and started his own business. Originally, everyone thought he would fail and then come back to inherit the Shen family in a disheartened manner. Unexpectedly, he succeeded, and in less than 5 years, the company's scale expanded significantly. Now, it is estimated that it can rival 5 or 6 Shen families. It has to be said that Shen Yanzhi doesn't like Shen Si, and he also has a bit of jealousy and unwillingness. Moreover, Shen Si was stingy and held grudges. Shen Yanzhi had said a bad word to him before, and it was unknown who had brought it to his ears. Later, he directly refused to cooperate with Shen Si, resulting in Shen Si losing several 100 million yuan. Shen Si rarely attends family banquets. Shen Yanzhi thought he wouldn't meet him this time, but he didn't expect to be so unlucky. He ran into him as soon as he arrived at the door. Because he was in a bad mood, he didn't notice that Yining next to him became extremely stiff when she saw Shen Si get off the car. He pushed open the car door and shouted, "Uncle." Shen Si turned around and glanced at him, his gaze casually shifting from the passenger seat. He nodded coldly, then turned around and walked directly into the old house. Seeing him leave, Yining breathed a deep sigh of relief. In the moment Shen Si looked over, she was so nervous that she forgot to breathe, afraid that he might suddenly say something shocking. After all, Shen Si always behaves impulsively and only looks at his own mood. When he is in a bad mood, any passing dog will be kicked by him. Fortunately, he didn't say anything. Yining pondered for a moment and decided to find an opportunity to talk to him alone later. When the two of them walked into the living room, there were already many people inside. Mr. Shen and Mrs. Shen were holding Shen Si to talk. Some people are born protagonists, and as long as they look over, they can see him in the crowd. Shen Si is such a presence. Sensing that Yining's gaze fell on Shen Si, Shen Yan's face looked a bit unsightly. "What are you staring at my uncle for?" Yining withdrew her gaze and said with a faint expression, "What's your business?" Sensing her indifference towards him, Shen Yanzhi said in a deep voice, "Yining, you know I don't like you paying attention to other men." Since the two were together, Shen Yanzhi has had a strong desire for control and does not allow Yining to interact with other members of the opposite sex. Previously, Yining felt that this was a manifestation of his love for himself, not only without any aversion, but also feeling sweet. Thinking about it now, I just find it ridiculous. She sneered and said, I don't like you sleeping with other women. Aren't you enjoying your sleep too? Shen Yanzhi gritted his teeth and said, today is a family banquet. Let's go back and solve this matter. Yining looked at him with a disdainful expression and said, if you don't want me to mention it, just don't mind my business. He doesn't want to tear his face now, it's just because he's afraid that Shen will be affected and that Mr. Shen will be dissatisfied with him. After all, although he is currently managing the Shen family, the shares of the Shen family are actually held by Mr. Shen and he has not given him a penny. As the two spoke, Mrs. Shen had already seen them and smiled, saying, Yining, Yanzhi, you're back. Come and sit down. Yining took a deep breath and as she turned her head, a smile had already appeared on her face. Although she doesn't really enjoy interacting with the Shen family, she still needs to have basic etiquette towards her elders. She walked up to Mrs. Shen and smiled, saying, hello grandparents. Mrs. Shen was persuading Shen Si to settle down and marry a wife to live a good life. When she saw Shen Yanzhi and Yining paired up, a smile appeared on her face. Sit down quickly. When he turned to look at Shen Si, his eyes were filled with dissatisfaction. Take a look at the banquet. The company is well managed, and the wife is beautiful. In another year or two, she might have children. And you? You're almost 30 years old, and you're all alone. If you don't bring your girlfriend next time, don't come back. Shen Si glanced at the two of them and said with a smile on his face, it's really beautiful. Just that small body, what kind of pain does giving birth cause? Yining frowned, feeling that when Shen Si said these words, his gaze at her was somewhat frivolous. Sitting beside her, Shen Yanzhi keenly noticed that Shen Si's gaze at Yining was somewhat off. As both men, he knew very well that Shen Si's gaze at Yining was not the gaze of elders at juniors, but rather like men looking at women suddenly. His hand hanging on his side suddenly tightened, and his body unconsciously tightened. Mrs. Shen frowned and said, is that my priority? You must give me a definite word today. When will you bring my daughter.In.Law back? It depends on the situation. If you encounter something you want to settle, you may bring it back tomorrow. Your eyes are on top of your head, it's strange to encounter them. I've arranged a blind date for you. You should dress up well tomorrow and don't show off your lazy side. I'm afraid you'll offend an old friend again tomorrow. Mrs. Shen was so angry that she felt a headache. You're making me so angry that I'm willing to accept it. Shen Si raised his eyebrows and glanced at Shen Yan. My eldest nephew has been married for several years. Compared to urging me to get married, it may be more reliable for you to urge him to have children early. Mrs. Shen felt the same way. No matter how much she urged, Shen Si couldn't possibly listen to her. He had his own ideas since childhood. She looked at Shen Yanzhi and Yining with a loving expression. Yining, you have been married for a few years. When are you planning to have children? Chapter 6 is not here at the right time. You are listening at novel.Audio. Yining lifted her head and was about to speak when Shen Yanzhi grabbed her hand and smiled, saying, Grandma, we're preparing. She wanted to shake off his hand, but Shen Yanzhi held it tightly and didn't give her any chance to break free. Since he doesn't make her happy, don't blame her for making him unhappy too. She looked at Mrs. Shen and said, Grandma, I'm currently looking for a job, so the matter of having a child may have to be postponed. As soon as these words were spoken, the living room fell into silence. Shen Yanzhi squeezed her hand tightly and his face became extremely gloomy. Yining frowned as she noticed the pain coming from her wrist. Shen Si's gaze lingered for a second on Shen Yanzhi's hand, which was tightly gripping Yining with bulging veins, before moving away with an indifferent expression. Shen Yanzhi's sister.in.law, Shen Si, sneered, Yining, don't blame your sister.in.law for being talkative. You've been married to Yanzhi City for a few years, what would it look like if you don't have a child again? And if it weren't for Yanzhi's insistence on marrying you back then, do you think with your family alone, you could have married into the Shen family? Don't be unsatisfied. You don't want to have children for the banquet. There are plenty of women outside who want to have children. If other women take the lead, it will still be you who looks ugly. She had a thoughtful expression, but looking at Yining's expression, there was a hint of contempt and superiority. Mrs. Shen frowned and looked at Shen Si's gaze with some dissatisfaction. Shuan, please speak a few words less. Shen Shuan pursed her lips, but she didn't speak again. Mrs. Shen looked at Yining with a kind smile on her face and said, Yining, since you are still young with Yanzhi, you can consider it if you don't want to have a child in 2 years. However, don't be too tired from work and your family is not short of money. You should just pass the time. Yining nodded and said, I know, Grandma. This unpleasant incident is considered a thing of the past, and the living room is once again restored to its previous peaceful state. Seeing that everyone's attention was not on them, Shen Yanzhi directly dragged Yining out of the living room. Until he dragged her into the pavilion in the backyard, Shen Yanzhi finally let go of her and said coldly, Yining, are you crazy? Are you really going to make our argument so that everyone at home knows you're happy? Yining rubbed the painful hand he had pinched and lowered her eyes, saying, I'm just telling the truth. What a truthful person. Shen Yanzhi looked at her with a gloomy expression and said, should I call my father.in.law to inform him? Ji's father has been feeling unwell recently, and the doctor said it's best not to be stimulated. Yining plans to divorce Shen Yanzhi first, and then slowly tell him about this matter. She raised her eyes and glared angrily at Shen Yanzhi, how dare you? Even though you had an affair before, what qualifications do you have to be so righteous? Shen Yanzhi's fist hanging on his side unconsciously clenched, and a hint of guilt flashed in his eyes, but soon it turned into impatience. I have promised you that I won't do it again in the future. If you don't want to see Shen Si, I will dismiss her. What else do you want? Yining felt that she couldn't communicate with him, so she didn't open her eyes and said, I don't want to argue with you here. Seeing her eyes slightly red, Shen Yanzhi let out a sigh and softened his tone. Yining, I really know I was wrong. As long as you don't mention divorce, I will definitely make it up to you. I love you and can't let you leave me. Yining felt ridiculous in her heart, how could this man be so shameless? Saying he loves her doesn't stop him from sleeping with another woman. And just the thought of him rolling in bed with other women makes her feel nauseous. I can't forgive you. Betrayal is her bottom line, she can't do it as if nothing has happened, nor can she reconcile with him. Shen Yanzhi is also aware of Yining's temper, and this matter is indeed his fault. It seems that he can only take it slowly. He knew that Yining still had feelings for him, otherwise when he found out about this, he would have caused a big trouble. As long as he didn't let go of his divorce, one day she would forgive him. Forget it, let's not talk about this anymore. If you don't want to have a child, we'll postpone your plan for 2 years. Since you want to work outside, I'll have my secretary arrange a position for you at Shen's tomorrow. As she listened to him arrange everything clearly, Yining couldn't help but laugh and looked at him with a mocking expression. Shen Yanzhi, in your eyes, I'm not alone. I can arrange for you to withdraw the puppet at will, right? Shen Yanzhi was stabbed by her gaze and couldn't help but frown. How could I arrange for you at will? You said you don't want to have a child, and I agreed to consider it in 2 years. If you want to work, I will arrange for you as well. Why are you still picking on me like this? Is it interesting to pretend to be confused while trying to understand? I don't want to have children because I want to divorce you, and I want to work because I want to completely distance myself from you. He looked down at Yining, her stubbornness on her face making him a little unhappy. Since getting married, Yining has been like a canary he has raised in captivity. How could he let her fly out of his palm? As long as I don't agree, this marriage is impossible for you to divorce, and even if you tell the lawyer that I cheated, can you provide evidence? He had a determined expression, even carrying a sense of arrogance that controlled everything. Yining unconsciously took a few steps back, her whole body trembling with anger. After tearing open Shen Yanzhi's gentle exterior, she realized how selfish and disgusting this person was at heart, and how she had loved such a person for 8 years. 18 to 20.6, the best 8 years of her life. Shen Yanzhi, you really make me sick. Seeing the undisguised disgust in her eyes, Shen Yanzhi's pupils suddenly shrank and he reached out to pinch her chin, forcing her to look at him. Yining, I understand you're angry, but I don't want to hear such words again in the future. His daughter should love him for a lifetime, how can she hate him? Even if he accidentally made a mistake, he wouldn't allow her to look at him with such a gaze. Yining patted his hand away in disgust and said, Don't touch me, I find it dirty. Dirty. Shen Yanzhi sneered, took a step forward, clasped her waist, pressed her against the pillar of the pavilion, lowered his head, and kissed her directly. Since she can only say things he doesn't like to hear, he has no choice but to gag her. Yining couldn't push him away, subconsciously leaning towards the beginning. Shen Yanzhi's warm lips fell on her cheek, and her whole body had goosebumps that made her feel nauseous. Shen Yanzhi, let go of me. Sure, as long as you don't say those words that hurt my heart anymore. Impossible. Then I can only use my own method to make you shut up. He pinched her chin and kissed her hard. Just as his lips were about to touch Yining, a soft cough suddenly sounded behind him. Big nephew, did I come at a bad time? Chapter 7. I am pregnant. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Shen Yanzhi's body suddenly froze, and his face couldn't see the extreme in an instant. He unconsciously tightened his hand as he pinched Yining's chin, and after several seconds, he released her before turning to look at Shen Si. Facing Shen Si's smiling gaze, Shen Yanzhi forced out a smile. No, uncle. What's up with you coming to see me for? Shen Si's mouth curved into a smile and he said, Your grandmother asked me to invite you to dinner. Okay, thank you, uncle. No trouble, but this is at least an old mansion. It's better for the eldest nephew to pay attention. As he spoke, his gaze casually brushed over Yining's red chin, filled with teasing. Sensing his gaze falling on Yining, Shen Yanzhi frowned and took a step forward to block her. Uncle, I got it. His face and tone were not good, and he looked at Shen Si with displeasure in his eyes, even slightly guarded. Shen Si shrugged lightly and withdrew his gaze as if nothing had happened. Alright, let's go eat. After Shen Si left, Shen Yanzhi turned around and wanted to hold Yining's hand, but she avoided his hand and crossed over him to leave. Shen Yanzhi quickly caught up with her, firmly grasped her hand, and said in a deep voice, If you don't want me to go find your father.In.Law, just be good. Yining's attempt to shake him off suddenly stopped, feeling powerless and angry in her heart. If she had not chosen to listen to Shen Yanzhi and go home as a housewife, she would not have been under his control and threatened by him everywhere now. She must find a job as soon as possible and have money to pay for her father's medical expenses in order to completely get rid of Shen Yanzhi. Before that, no matter how much she divorced him, it would be of no use. After thinking about this, Yining stopped struggling and let him pull her towards the restaurant. After dinner, everyone dispersed. The car stopped at the entrance of the villa, and Shen Yanzhi directly locked the car door, not in a hurry to get off. Yining frowned and looked at him, What are you doing? Let's talk about it. If you want to talk about divorce, there's no need to talk about it. I won't bring up this matter for now. Shen Yanzhi squinted his eyes, and a hint of danger flashed in his eyes. Temporarily. Seeing her indifferent expression, Shen Yanzhi pursed his thin lips tightly and his face was displeased. However, He also knew that it would take some time for Yining to accept her infidelity, and as long as she didn't mention divorce, he had a chance to salvage her heart. After pondering for a moment, he nodded and said, "Yining, I'm glad you're willing to give me another chance." Yining ignored his words and looked at him expressionlessly. "Can you open the car door now? I'm tired and want to go rest." Click. At the moment when the car lock was unlocked, Yining pushed open the door and walked into the villa without looking back. When Shen Yanzhi walked to the bedroom door, she realized that she had already locked it. He felt a bit helpless, and after a moment, he couldn't help but laugh again. When the two of them first got married, sometimes he would make a fool of her, and the next day she would also lock the bedroom door like this to express her anger. After a few days of calming down, let him enter the bedroom. Thinking of this, the smile on his lips deepened a bit. Just calm down slowly. They have a lifetime, as long as she is still by his side, as long as she still has him in her heart, there will definitely be a day to forgive him. In the bedroom, Yining is selecting clothes for tomorrow's interview. She picked out a few sets that she was quite satisfied with, took photos and sent them to Wei. She asked her which set was suitable for the interview, and the other party called directly. "Why are you suddenly looking for a job? Have you resolved the matter with Shen Yanzhi?" Yining lowered her eyes and spoke calmly, "Not yet. I plan to find a job first. After all, I don't have any financial means at the moment. When I have enough money to pay for my father's medical expenses and support myself, I will talk to him about divorce. During this period, you can just pretend that nothing has happened and live under the same roof as him." "How could that be? I still have some money in my hand. I'm planning to take a look at the house tomorrow after the interview and move out as soon as possible." She also realized now that divorce cannot be based solely on a momentary impulse. Now she has neither a job nor money, and even if she hires a lawyer, she can't afford legal fees. Moreover, ordinary lawyers compete with Shen's professional legal team, which is no different from using eggs to strike stones. She either doesn't hire her, or if she wants to hire her, she needs to hire the most professional divorce lawyer to help her file a divorce lawsuit. As for not leaving the house for a penny, she never thought about that kind of thing. It was Shen Yanzhi who betrayed her in her marriage. Why did she not want a penny? If it weren't for her incompetence, she would have wanted Shen Yanzhi to leave the house clean. As for the matter of her father's medical expenses, spending Shen Yanzhi's money on Yining did not have any psychological burden. When she gave him that research result and helped him earn at least tens of billions, her father's medical expenses were just a drop in the bucket. "Which company are you applying to tomorrow?" "Chengyuan Pharmaceutical." "Do you plan to continue researching and developing drugs?" "Well, I haven't been working in the past few years, but I've been paying attention to this area and haven't lost my previous knowledge. Besides researching and developing drugs, I don't know anything else." "Why didn't you tell me earlier and come to our company? I'll give you an internal referral." Yining couldn't help but smile and half-jokingly said, "You scold your company boss in front of me every day. Now your boss is like a vampire squeezing an employee in my eyes. Are you sure you want to bring me into the pit?" There was a strange silence for a few seconds on the other side of the phone, and suddenly a sudden male voice came through. "Sure Wei, when did I squeeze employees?" The other party seemed to be a bit far away from Sher Wei's phone, so the voice was a bit ethereal, but Yining could still hear the danger in his tone. Sher Wei chuckled twice and hurriedly said, "Yining. Well, I have something to do here, I won't tell you for now. Send me a message tomorrow after your interview, let's have lunch together." Not giving Yining a chance to speak, Sher Wei hung up the phone as soon as she finished speaking. After checking the time, it was already past 10 p.m., and Yining raised her eyebrows. Sher Wei has always had a regular schedule, and at this point, there is actually someone next to her, her boss. It seems that we need to have a thorough inquiry tomorrow. Putting down her phone, Yining hesitated for a moment and picked a light green, conventional long dress. Not too outstanding, but also showing a strong emphasis on this interview. Put the other clothes in the wardrobe, and Yining took her pajamas to take a shower in the bathroom. After taking a shower and drying her hair, Yining finished her skincare and went to bed. On the other side, the study. Shen Yanzhi hesitated for a long time, but still anonymously posted online asking how to coax his wife back after cheating. Unexpectedly, all the replies below were urging him to divorce and let his wife go, which made Shen Yan so angry that he decided to delete the post. I was about to go back to my room to sleep when my phone suddenly rang. It was a WeChat message sent by Shen Si. Mr. Shen, I'm pregnant. Chapter 8. There are ways to prevent you from being born. You are listening at life.Audio. Shen Yanzhi suddenly grabbed his phone and stared at the line of words, his eyes filled with gloom. He took protective measures every time he had sex with Shen Si, so either she was lying to him or she was tampering with the condom. Either way, it has touched Shen Yanzhi's bottom line. He directly dialed Shen Si's phone and said, "Where are you now?" Hearing the coldness and anger in his tone, Shen Si felt a surge of sourness in her heart. "Mr. Shen, I'm pregnant. Aren't you happy at all?" Shen Yanzhi sneered, "Are you sure you're pregnant, and it's mine?" "Mr. Shen, I've only had you as a man before. Is it yours that I'm pregnant with? Don't you know?" Her tone was questioning with a hint of grievance, but Shen Yanzhi only felt annoyed. "Then take it down. Except for Yining, he doesn't need any other women to give birth to him. Moreover, for women like Shen Si who take the initiative to embrace, he is just playing around and has never taken it to heart. No, this is me and your child. I want to have them." Shen Yan's eyebrows furrowed, his eyes filled with annoyance. If he had known this woman was so unintelligent, he wouldn't have touched her in the first place. "I'll ask one last time, where are you now?" The phone was quiet for a while before Shen Si's crying voice came through. "Mr. Shen, are you asking me where I am? Are you trying to force me to be sent to the hospital for an abortion?" Shen Yanzhi remained silent and answered her in silence. "Since you don't like this child, I will be born and raised alone, and I won't let him know about his biological father." Before he could finish speaking, Shen Yanzhi cut off the phone and contacted his secretary to find out where Shen Si was. On the day Yining found out about his infidelity, he discovered that it was Shen Si who was behind it and directly kicked her out of the company. Unexpectedly, she still managed to stay behind. That child must not be born, otherwise he and Yining will really be finished. In the middle of the night, Yining heard the sound of the car engine starting halfway through her dreams and didn't pay attention. "When I was having breakfast in the morning, I heard the nanny say that Shen Yan hurriedly left in the middle of the night last night, and I don't know if something happened to the company." Yining remained silent and took a sip of the milk in front of her, with a hint of mockery flashing in her eyes. "What's wrong with the company? I'm probably in a hurry to see that woman outside." After breakfast, Yining changed her clothes and drove directly to Chengyuan Pharmaceutical for an interview. After the interview, HR asked her to go home and wait for news, and she will be notified within 3 days. Stepping out of Chengyuan Pharmaceutical, Yining sent a message to Shi asking where she would have lunch, and Shi directly sent her a restaurant address. Yining put away her phone, got on the car and navigated to the restaurant. However, she didn't notice that there was a woman wearing a white coat and exquisite makeup not far away who stared in the direction where she was for a few seconds, and her eyebrows involuntarily furrowed. The woman next to her, who was also wearing a white coat, looked in the direction of her gaze, only to see Yining's car tail disappear at the corner. "Yining, what are you looking at?" Yining shook her head and said, "It's nothing. I think I saw someone I know just now. Maybe I misread them." "Is it your friend?" A hint of disgust flashed in Yining's eyes and she said coldly, "No, a very annoying person. The person you dislike is definitely not a good person." The woman's tone was flattering and pleasing, but Yining was very receptive. Forget it, don't mention her anymore, it's affecting your mood. When Yining arrived at the restaurant, Shi Wei had just arrived and the two met at the entrance. Shi Wei stepped forward and took her hand, and the two of them walked in together. How was the interview? I feel pretty good, but I'm not sure if I can apply. If you can't, just switch to another one. With so many pharmaceutical companies in Shenzhen, losing you would definitely be a big loss for their company. Thank you for your confidence in me, but I haven't been in the laboratory for several years. The research and development of drugs requires a high level of experience. Apart from conducting experiments for 3 years during her graduate studies at school and luckily achieving some results, she is not comparable to those who have worked for several years in terms of work experience, which she knows for herself. Don't worry, as long as you start working, you will soon catch up with others. After all, it can be said that Yining forgot to eat and sleep when conducting experiments. After all, in order to obtain experimental results and data, she was able to stay in the laboratory for a month. Stop talking about this. Last night, I heard a man's voice on the phone. Tell me, what's going on? A hint of guilt flashed on Shi Wei's face, unconsciously avoiding Yining's gaze. Really? What man? Did you hear me wrong? Yining stared at her and said expressionlessly, Shi Wei. I'm not old enough to have hearing problems. I can hear both ears clearly. There was a man at your house last night. Shi Wei's cheeks flushed, knowing that she couldn't escape today. Okay, I said. That person last night was indeed my boss. I was dating him. After Shi Wei finished speaking, she found that Yining had not moved. Looking up suspiciously, Shi Wei's heart sank as she saw Yining's gaze fixed on a certain part of the restaurant, her eyes turning red. Following her gaze, she indeed saw Shen Yanzhi sitting with an unfamiliar woman. He had a cold face, while the woman next to him kept wiping away her tears and occasionally looked at him affectionately. Shi Wei didn't expect Shen Yanzhi to dare to appear so openly with his mistress in public places. Is that the mistress that Shen Yanzhi is looking for? Yining didn't want to pay attention, but when she saw the scene of them sitting together, her heart still felt like it was being fiercely caught by a big net, so painful that she could hardly breathe. I'll go deal with her. Being a mistress and daring to show off, you're really shameless to the extreme. Seeing Shi Wei's angry expression, Yining quickly grabbed her. Don't go. Now in the past, it will only make oneself more embarrassed. How can you bear it? Before she could utter these 3 words, seeing Yining's almost crying expression, Shi Wei's heart hurt fiercely. Don't cry, because this scumbag is not worth it. Yining rubbed her eyes and took a deep breath, saying, I know. At the moment Shen Yanzhi cheated, this man was no longer worth wasting half of her emotions. But she has loved him for 8 years, and it is impossible for her to remain calm in the short term. However, she believed that she would slowly pull him away from her heart until he became a stranger. Without looking at those 2 people again, Yining turned around and walked towards the other side. Shen Yanzhi noticed that Yudeo's gaze was on him, but when he looked up, he didn't see anything. Chen Si beside him was still sobbing softly, and his mood became even more irritable. He lit a cigarette and said coldly, if you don't want to fight, I have a way to prevent you from giving birth. Chapter 9. Never liked it. You are listening at life.Audio. Chen Si's crying voice suddenly stopped, her eyes filled with grievances. Mr. Shen, I am sincere to you. Thinking of the woman's calculations towards him, Shen Yanzhi felt a surge of disgust in his heart. How much is your sincerity worth? He took out a bank card and threw it on the table, looking at her expressionlessly. There's 2 million in it. Take the money to the hospital and beat the child yourself, or I'll have the bodyguard tie you to the hospital. You should know how to choose. Chen Si hesitated for a moment, shook his hands, picked up his bank card, covered his face, and ran out of the restaurant. Calling the bodyguard to watch Shen Si go to the hospital, Shen Yanzhi impatiently hung up the phone. Seeing the screensaver Yining's photo, his expression softened a bit. Without any hesitation, he directly dialed her phone number. It took a long time for the other side to connect. "What's up?" Her cold tone was like pouring a bucket of cold water from the beginning, and Shen Yanzhi's heart, which had been slightly feverish due to missing her, suddenly cooled down. He unconsciously tightened his hand while holding the phone, trying his best to restrain her from realizing his disappointment. "It's okay, I just missed you. Have you eaten yet?" Yining's eyes flashed with mockery. Being with Shen Si, she could still spare some time to think of her. She was truly a master of time management. "I'm eating. If you're okay, I'll hang up." There was a silence on the phone for a while before Shen Yanzhi's deep voice came through. I won't work overtime tonight. Let's go back and have dinner together." Answering him was a buzzing sound. In the private room, after Yining put down her phone, Shi spoke indignantly, "Shen Yanzhi is too scumbag. While eating with the mistress, she called you and said she missed you. She used to believe that he was the only good man in the world, and also believed that he would bring happiness to Yining." Yining took the menu from the side and lowered her gaze, saying, "All right, don't mention him. It affects your appetite. Let's order." Watching her pretend calm demeanor, Shi's eyes were filled with heartache. But she also knows that emotional matters can only be slowly resolved on her own, and no matter how much others say, it's useless. Fortunately, Yining was clear-headed enough and had no intention of forgiving Shen Yanzhi. After ordering, the two started chatting. While chatting, Shi suddenly remembered something. "By the way, I heard that Qinghong Technology is preparing to invest in the park. If I remember correctly, Shen Si, the president of Qinghong Technology, is Shen Yanzhi's uncle." Upon hearing the word Shenfang, Yining paused as she drank water. Her hand clenched slightly as she held the cup, and the scene of his burning breath spraying in her ear that night flashed through her mind. The aggressive aura emanating from him still makes her shudder at the thought of it. Yining frowned and forced herself to no longer think about it, giving a faint "Do you want to consider a different company for the interview? After all, if you divorce Shen Yanzhi and see the Shen family again, it will probably be awkward." Yining shook her head and put down her water glass before speaking, "Even if I enter Chengyuan, I am just an ordinary pharmacist. He won't even notice me, and Shen Yanzhi is not very close to this uncle. Besides, the person who cheated was Shen Yanzhi. Even if we wanted to avoid suspicion, it should be the Shen family who avoided her. Since he has a bad relationship with Shen Yan, can you ask him for help with your divorce? Even if their relationship is not good and both of them have the surname Shen, do you think he will help me?" "Yeah." Shi sighed and looked somewhat disappointed. Yining couldn't help but smile and said, "All right, we can't rush to get a divorce. My main task now is to find a job and move out. Let's take our time. Well, I'll take a leave this afternoon to accompany you to see the house." "No need, I can do it alone." Shi could only nod and said, "Okay, then if you have anything to do, just call me. You can choose a weekend to move, and I'll go help you. Don't worry, I won't be polite to you if there's anything I need from you." The two finished their meal and parted ways at the entrance of the restaurant. Yining contacted several intermediaries and after looking at several houses, her favorite was a one-bedroom apartment of over 60 square meters. She likes this house both in terms of decoration style and location, but the rent is a bit expensive. Thinking of the little money left in her bank account, Yining decided to choose another affordable and further away from the city center house. However, she was not in a hurry to sign a contract with the agent and planned to wait until the interview results of Chengyuan came out before deciding whether to rent. "It's already past 6 in the evening when I returned to the villa." Shen Yanzhi sat in the living room and suddenly froze when he heard the sound of the door opening and looked up. Today, Yining wore a light green dress with her hair combed into a high ponytail, revealing her slender and fair neck, clean and with a hint of playfulness. Since getting married to him, she occasionally accompanies him to attend banquets, and every word and action at home follows the standards of a wealthy lady. Once his mother came over and saw her wearing pajamas at home with meatballs, reminding her to pay attention to her image at home in the future. She never tied her hair again. It has to be said that Yining, who is so energetic, is more beautiful than the one who was bound by the rules and regulations of the Shen family before, and also makes him more tempted. But at the same time as he was tempted, a wave of unease surged in his heart, always feeling like she was about to leave him at any moment. "Where did you go today? I heard from Mrs. Wang that you left after breakfast." "I'm out looking for a job," Yining said with a faint expression as she changed her shoes. "Which company? Should I go and say hello?" Yining frowned and looked at him. "This is my business, I hope you don't interfere." If he were to say hello and let herself in, it would be different from accepting his arrangement to enter the Shen family. She would still be under his surveillance. Seeing the resistance in her eyes, Shen Yanzhi's eyes flashed with injury. "Yining, I just want to help you." "Thank you, but I don't need it." Without looking at him again, she walked straight upstairs. When passing by the sofa, Shen Yanzhi held on to his wrist. The next second, a bouquet of flowers appeared in front of her. On the day he confessed to her, he gave her Juliet roses. Flower language represents guarded love, as well as pure, sincere, selfless, and enduring love. Since then, every time she went to the flower shop, she only bought this type of flower. However, looking at the blooming flowers in front of her at this moment, she only felt sarcastic. Their marriage, from the moment he had an affair, did not deserve the beautiful words of sincerity and eternity. Seeing her head down without speaking, Shen Yanzhi pursed his lips and his voice was a bit low. "Today, I passed by a flower shop and wanted to buy you a bouquet of flowers," he said. Yining broke free from his hand and looked up at him. She had emotions of disgust, impatience, and coldness in her eyes, but only there was no more love. "No need, I never liked this flower." Chapter 10. Long Skills. You are listening at novel.Audio. Shen Yanzhi was taken aback for a moment and instinctively spoke, "But every time you go to the flower shop, you always buy this flower." Yining, don't be fooled. He probably forgot long ago. On the day he confessed to her, he gave her Juliet roses. But it's not important anymore. He can even betray their relationship, and it's normal not to take this small matter to heart. That was before. Yining walked past him and directly returned to the bedroom. She could sense that Shen Yanzhi's gaze had been fixed on her, but she no longer cared whether he would feel disappointed or sad due to her words. After changing clothes and going downstairs, the nanny has already served dinner to the table. "Young master, young grandmother, dinner is ready." Yining nodded and walked directly to the dining table to sit down and eat, without even looking at Shen Yan. Shen Yanzhi frowned, but still didn't say anything. He walked silently across from her and sat down. Seeing that the atmosphere between the two was not right, Wang Mama guessed that they were arguing. She picked up the flowers on the living room table and looked at Yining with a smile, saying, "Young lady, is this flower still the same as before? Is it ready to be planted and sent to your room?" "No need, just throw it away." The two of them used to argue, but Yining has never been so indifferent before. For a moment, Wang Mama felt a bit lost and instinctively looked at Shen Yanzhi. Shen Yan didn't lift his head either, and his tone was a bit indifferent. As she said, "Throw it away." Wang Ma felt a wave of regret in her heart and realized that she had said the wrong thing. She quickly put down the flowers and turned into the kitchen. After hesitating for a while, she still sent a message to Shen Yanzhi's mother. After all, she always felt that this argument between the two was different from every previous one. After dinner, Yining put down her bowl and got up directly to go back to the bedroom. Just as the door was about to close, one hand pressed against it. Yining, do you plan to be so indifferent to me in the future? We are people who want to live our lives. I would rather you hit and scold me than be cold and violent towards me. Looking up at Shen Yanzhi, she saw him looking at her with a helpless expression, which was no different from how he comforted her after their argument before. Yining had no expression on her face. He always wants to weaken the affair and use her softness to make her forgive him. But after being together for 8 years, she knew him too well and forgave him this time. From now on, she will face countless instances of his infidelity. After all, once a person gives up their bottom line, what they get in return is not guilt, but deeper and deeper harm each time. If it were me who cheated, could you remain calm and even forgive me in such a short period of time? Shen Yanzhi's hand gripping the doorknob suddenly showed blue veins, and a fierce and murderous intent surged in his eyes. If he had seen Yining sleeping with another man, he would have couldn't help but kill that man. Seeing his sudden cold expression, Yining felt a bit amused. See, don't force others to do things you can't even do yourself. Shen Yanzhi looked down at Yining and spoke word by word. Yining, I will give you time to slowly accept this matter, but I hope you understand that I can never let you leave in this lifetime. He was well aware that Yining was looking for a job just to prepare for leaving him. But he will soon make her understand that everything she does has no effect. His eyes were filled with possessiveness and paranoia, causing Yining's heart to involuntarily tremble and a chill to climb up her back. She was well aware that Shen Yanzhi appeared gentle on the surface, but in fact, no one could stop him from going crazy. If she insists on getting divorced, their relationship may not end well. Seeing the fear in her eyes, Shen Yanzhi reacted and frightened her, his expression becoming slightly gentle. Don't be afraid, as long as you stay by my side obediently, I won't hurt you. He reached out to help her gather the broken hair on her cheek behind her ear, but Yining instinctively took a step back, and his hand froze in mid-air. The atmosphere froze for a few seconds, and Shen Yanzhi withdrew his hand as if nothing had happened. I'm going on a business trip tomorrow for half a month. When I come back, I'll move back to my bedroom. Please be mentally prepared and rest early. Yining closed the door and a thin layer of sweat had already formed on her back. She was very clear about the meaning of Shen Yanzhi's words just now, and he only gave her half a month to accept and forgive his infidelity. It seems that the sooner we move out, the better. Ding dong. The phone suddenly rang. It was a message sent by the personnel of Chengyuan. She was admitted, but her salary was lower than she expected. But now she has no choice. After replying to the message and confirming that she can start next Monday, Yining immediately contacted the agent. The next day, Yining signed a contract with the landlord, with a lease term of 1 year and payment to be made every 3 months. The landlord is responsible for property management fees, not including water and electricity fees. After paying the rent, there are only a few thousand yuan left in Yinka. She didn't rush back and went to the supermarket downstairs to buy cleaning tools such as brooms and mops, and carefully cleaned the rental house. It was almost noon after finishing her work, and Yining was so tired that she could hardly straighten her waist. However, looking at the newly renovated rental house, her heart was filled with a sense of achievement. In the next few days, she will be packing things in the villa, and on Saturday, Wei will help her move things. Seeing her dragging her suitcase, Mrs. Wang looked puzzled. Young lady. Are you going on a trip? Yining shook her head and said with a smile, I'm planning to move out and live. Thank you for taking care of me in the next few years. Upon hearing this, Wang Mama's face changed. She had already felt that there was a problem between Yining and Shen Yanzhi. After all, the two used to stay together when they were at home, but recently there has been almost no interaction. Moreover, in the past few days of Shen Yanzhi's business trip, Yining has not called him a single time, nor even asked a question. Previously, when Shen Yanzhi was on a business trip, she would sit in the living room every night and call him for over an hour. Young lady. Did you argue with your husband? Yining unconsciously tightened her grip on the armrest of her suitcase, and after a few seconds, she spoke softly, "No, I found a job and live closer outside." After speaking, she nodded slightly to Wang Mama and turned around without looking back. Looking at her back, Wang Mama's unease grew stronger and she quickly called Shen Yanzhi. "Young master, the young lady just left dragging her suitcase." When Shen Yanzhi received a call from Wang Mama, he had just reached an agreement to cooperate and send the partner to the elevator. The words from the other side made his smile freeze on his face, and his original good mood was suddenly swept away, and his expression became extremely gloomy. "I didn't expect her to be so skilled that she ran away from home while he was not at home." "I understand." Cut off the phone, Shen Yanzhi found the shortcut key to dial out. Looking at the flashing numbers on the screen, Yining was not surprised at all. She knew that as soon as she walked out of the villa, Shen Yanzhi would immediately receive news. I pursed my lips and slid my fingers on the phone screen. As soon as he connected, he heard his voice with a hint of anger. "Yining, I don't agree with you moving out. Now, go home immediately."